On October 3rd, a dramatic scene unfolded near the Five Islands of Korea's West Sea. The Korean Coast Guard launched an operation using high-speed patrol boats and helicopters to target Chinese fishing vessels operating illegally. The Chinese fishermen responded by employing a linked strategy. 9 vessels were tied together with ropes. Whenever the Coast Guard boarded one boat, the crew would immediately transfer to a nearby vessel, quickly cutting the ropes before ramming their ships into the law enforcement boats. After an hour-long battle, the Korean Coast Guard managed to seize 2 Chinese fishing boats, each weighing 50 tons, while 28 smaller vessels scattered in the chaos and escaped. 2 days later, a larger 300-ton Chinese fishing boat was also captured. In total, 30 Chinese fishermen were detained, and nearly 10 tons of fish were confiscated. The incident took place in the waters southwest of Socheong Island, an area within Korea's exclusive economic zone. This region is known for its complex coastline, strong currents, and rich natural fishing grounds for blue crabs and yellow croakers. Each spring and fall, rare fish species migrate through these waters toward Korea's coasts. Chinese fishing boats position themselves in the paths of these fish and use destructive methods like electric fishing and large nets, sweeping up entire schools that were supposed to reach Korean shores. This has caused a sharp decline in Korean fishermen's catch, with their daily harvest in 2021 dropping to half of what it used to be. To make matters worse, the number of illegal Chinese fishing boats is rising, with a record 974 vessels apprehended last year, the highest in 5 years. The situation stems from the Chinese government's failure to manage its own fishing industry. Why are so many Chinese fishing boats fishing illegally in Korean waters? It's a complicated issue, deeply tied to the Chinese Communist Party's governance and ambitions. Back in late 2011, China's Global Times interviewed Chinese fishermen. What was their biggest complaint? There were simply no more fish in China's own waters. In the early 2000s, the Chinese government introduced a fishing ban period, which was supposed to protect the marine ecosystem and give fish populations a chance to recover. But in reality, many fishing boats ignored the rules and continued to operate during the ban. The result? By 2010, the Chinese side of the Yellow Sea was almost completely depleted of fish. Even the smallest fry were disappearing. The nearshore fish resources had been wiped out. This fishing ban was set by the Chinese government, so why weren't they enforcing it? How could they allow illegal fishing during the ban? It's a classic case of having laws but not enforcing them. The collapse of China's fisheries can't just be blamed on the fishermen. It's also the fault of the Chinese Communist Party's negligence. Over the years, with increasing marine pollution, Chinese fishermen are finding it harder and harder to survive. Speaking of marine pollution, that's another issue tied directly to the Chinese government. Local officials are fixated on boosting GDP because higher numbers look good on paper and help them climb the ranks. How do they increase GDP? By welcoming polluting industries that other regions reject. China has environmental protection laws, but they're not enforced. Polluting projects go ahead, with wastewater dumped straight into the ocean, killing off the marine ecosystem. This short-sighted focus on immediate economic gain has left little concern for the long-term environmental impact. By 2011, in the waters where the Bohai and Yellow Seas meet, the fish Chinese fishermen were catching were mostly the size of a hand. A single fishing trip might bring in about 200,000 yuan, but after a 10-day round trip, burning fuel that costs over 140,000 yuan, and paying the wages of more than 20 crew members, there's barely any profit left. In contrast, over in Korea, fishermen can fill their boats with prized fish like pomfret, mackerel, and yellow croaker in just 3 days, fetching high prices at market. So why wouldn't Chinese fishermen cross over? Cross-border fishing. Crossing into Korean waters to fish isn't easy. First, you would need a fishing permit, which isn't cheap. Back in 2005, it cost around 3,000 or 4,000 yuan. By 2008, the price jumped to 260,000 yuan, and now it's over 1 million yuan. The reason for the skyrocketing price? These permits were originally quotas China received from Korea, which were then distributed in China through a lottery system. However, over time, the permits started being traded among fishing boats, pushing the prices higher and higher. If local Chinese governments had managed this better and prevented the reselling of permits, couldn't they have kept the prices under control? The inflation in permit prices is another example of poor oversight by local Chinese authorities. Some fishermen, fed up with the hassle, decided to go without a permit altogether. They sneak out at night or during bad weather, hoping to avoid being noticed by the Korean Coast Guard, making a quick trip and returning before getting caught. But this is risky. In 2011, one boat capsized on its way back, and another fisherman recalled being caught in a storm and nearly capsizing. He still gets scared thinking about it. When it comes to penalties, the boats that are detained and fined by Korea face further punishment from Chinese authorities when they return home. First, they're banned from fishing for several months. Even worse, they might lose their fuel subsidies, which are vital for fishermen. For a 280 horsepower boat, the annual fee subsidy can reach 170,000 yuan, a significant amount. So, these Chinese fishing boats get fined abroad, and as soon as they get home, they get fined again. The Chinese Communist Party claims to care for its people, so why aren't they standing up for the fishermen in situations like this? Fishermen are being fined into a corner, yet the government doesn't step in to help. Some might ask, if fishing is so difficult, why not switch to a different job? Easier said than done. Most fishermen don't own land, so they can't switch to farming. And if a large number of fishermen change careers, it wouldn't just affect them. The entire related industry, like transportation, refrigeration, and storage, could fall apart. The problem is that the Chinese government now prioritizes deep-sea operations, leaving individual fishermen to fend for themselves. For those fishermen, they're left with two options: work for a big company in deep-sea fishing, or continue their risky, illegal fishing trips. There's no help from the government at any level. In contrast, other countries might introduce policies to help fishermen transition, like providing training for new skills, subsidies for starting businesses, or even social security. The geopolitics behind fishery disputes. The issue of Chinese fishermen illegally fishing in the West Sea ultimately stems from the unresolved maritime boundary between China and South Korea. Why is this the case? The Yellow Sea between the two countries is less than 400 nautical miles wide, and according to international law, every country is entitled to a 200 nautical mile exclusive economic zone, EEZ. But since the Yellow Sea is less than 400 nautical miles wide, there's simply not enough space for both countries to claim their full EEZ. So, how should this be resolved? South Korea has proposed drawing a median line, but China disagrees, arguing that its coastline along the West Sea is longer than South Korea's and that it needs more fishery resources to support its larger population. In 2013, China even unilaterally declared the 124th meridian east as the boundary line and warned the South Korean Navy not to cross it. Naturally, South Korea was unhappy with this declaration, as it would mean that the Chinese Communist Party would control 70% of the Yellow Sea. The CCP's real goal behind this move is knowing that South Korea won't agree to such terms, which means the boundary remains unsettled. This way, China's military and Coast Guard can maintain greater freedom of movement in the area. China's Coast Guard vessels and patrol planes frequently operate between the 123rd and 124th meridians, is staking a claim to the area. The message they're sending to neighboring countries is, "We're here every day, so this territory must belong to China." China's Navy is also up its presence in the West Sea. In 2020, around 20 aircraft carrier drills and 10 anti-submarine exercises took place near waters under South Korean jurisdiction, with the number of drills only increasing in subsequent years. These exercises serve not only as training, but also as a signal to South Korea and the US. China's Navy operates here too. Moreover, Chinese fishermen are more than just ordinary fishermen. They are valuable allies to the CCP's military, collecting maritime intelligence for the military and providing assistance when needed. After 2008, the number of Chinese fishing boats in the West Sea surged dramatically. Before 2010, you could barely spot a few boats along the shipping route from Dalian to Shanghai. But after 2010, Chinese fishing vessels blanketed the West Sea, forcing ships to navigate cautiously. The strategic significance of the West Sea dispute. With China's Coast Guard and military exercises occupying large areas of the sea and Chinese fishing boats taking up considerable space, how much room is left for South Korea's fishermen, Coast Guard, and Navy? The gradual encroachment is essentially China's strategy to dominate the West Sea. South Korean Defense Minister Shin Won-sik has openly stated that China aims to turn the West Sea into its own internal sea. He also believes that Chinese fishing boats may actually be maritime militias, fishing in peacetime but ready to assist the military when needed. Kim Seong-han, A professor at Korea University also mentioned that China's actions are designed to give it an advantage when negotiating maritime boundaries in the future, ultimately turning the West Sea into its own territory. Why does China want control over the West Sea? There are several key reasons. Around 70% of China's naval forces are deployed in the West Sea near South Korea, because this area is close to China's capital, Beijing. If China's activities in the West Sea are restricted, it could be forced to move its navy further south, weakening the military's ability to protect Beijing and making it easier for the US, South Korea, and Japan to carry out potential decapitation strikes. Secondly, China hopes that its military presence in the area will limit joint military exercises between the US and South Korea in the West Sea. To achieve this, China is working to expand its presence there. Chinese fishing boats are sent out frequently to increase visibility, creating a situation where, over time, other countries might gradually come to accept China's claim of special rights in the region. Thirdly, if China turns the West Sea into its own internal sea, it could potentially prevent half of South Korea's navy from participating in operations in the South China Sea in support of freedom of navigation. This would mean that the US loses an important ally in the South China Sea dispute. Finally, controlling the West China Sea could also mean controlling the area's yet-to-be-discovered resources. South Korea and the US have recognized China's ambitions, which is why they're so sensitive to the actions of Chinese fishing boats. This is a contest between major powers over control of the seas, disguised as fishing disputes. Since 2017, South Korea has established the West Sea Five Islands Special Guard Unit, which consists of over 400 officers, 9 large vessels, and 3 speedboats specifically tasked with stopping Chinese fishing boats from fishing illegally in Korean waters. The South Korean government has also taken an increasingly tough stance. The Minister of Oceans and Fisheries has declared a policy of zero tolerance. What does that mean? It means that any boat caught will face severe penalties. In addition to fines, fishing equipment will be confiscated, fishermen will be expelled, and in serious cases, they might even be detained. Just this past October, South Korea was prepared to fine one group of fishermen 3 million won, that's $222,000, and more money than many fishermen could hope to make in a lifetime. One reason for South Korea's strict actions is that China has long claimed that Chinese fishermen have fished in the West Sea since ancient times, and therefore should have priority. South Korea quickly realized that strict enforcement is necessary to assert its own presence in the region. Otherwise, it could be at a disadvantage during future negotiations. The North Korean factor. It's also important to mention North Korea. The area where these Chinese fishing boats were caught is right near the maritime border between North and South Korea, a boundary still under dispute. According to South Korean military experts, when Chinese fishing boats operate in this region and South Korea aggressively drives them away, North Korea sometimes interprets this as a challenge to its territorial waters. In the past decade, at least 2 small-scale naval clashes have occurred between North and South Korea, further escalating tensions between the two countries. This is exactly the kind of situation the CCP seems happy to see. Chinese fishing boats are not only active in the West Sea near North Korea. Since 2004, they have been fishing in the East Sea, also known as the Sea of Japan. In this region, warm currents from the Korean Strait meet cold currents from the north along the Sea of Gangwon Province, creating the ideal habitat for various fish species. Chinese boats often position themselves near the mouths of rivers, where squid from North Korea's East Sea swim southward, catching them in large quantities. Since then, South Korean fishermen along the East Coast have had a hard time in making a living. Squid catches in that area have dropped to just 1/3 of their previous levels. In 2004, 144 Chinese fishing boats were involved, and Gangwon Province's squid catch totaled 22,000 tons. By 2016, the number of Chinese vessels had increased to 1,268, while South Korea's squid catch had fallen to just 7,297 tons. Fishermen along South Korea's east coast now worry that squid might disappear altogether, just like pollock, which was once South Korea's national fish, but was overfished from Gangwon Province's waters in the 1970s and 1980s. After Chinese fishing boats depleted the squid stocks along North Korea's east coast, North Korean fishermen were forced to venture further into the Sea of Japan in search of squid. However, their boats are poorly equipped for deep-sea fishing, which often resulted in accidents. Some boats have been found adrift in the Sea of Japan with no survivors. These are the infamous ghost ships. Chinese fishermen's activities in the Sea of Japan have also caused conflicts with Russia, not just South Korea. In July 2012, a Chinese fishing boat from Weihai, Shandong Province, entered Russian waters in the Sea of Japan. When a Russian patrol ship, the Dzerzhinsky, attempted to check the boat, the Chinese vessel tried to escape. During the 3-hour chase, the Chinese boat maneuvered dangerously, eventually colliding with the Russian patrol ship. Tragically, one Chinese fisherman fell overboard and died. The Russian patrol ship ultimately subdued the Chinese vessel through gunfire. Whether it's North Korea, Russia, or South Korea, Chinese fishing boats have caused problems around the world. They often disregard regulations, fish in foreign waters, and even resort to violent resistance, including ramming into the enforcement vessels of other nations. If we look at how North Korea and Russia treat Chinese fishermen, we can see that it's not South Korea that mistreats them, but rather North Korea and Russia. They have kidnapped Chinese fishermen, subjected them to gunfire, abuse, and even death. In North Korea, Chinese fishermen are fed just a single bun a day and often face beatings. In Russia, patrol boats fire directly at Chinese vessels. In comparison, South Korea's Coast Guard treats Chinese boats relatively leniently, yet in February of this year, a Chinese fishing boat still rammed and sank a South Korean vessel. The latest news from the afternoon of October 9th reports that a large group of Chinese fishing boats once again attempted to enter South Korean waters. The South Korean Coast Guard quickly dispatched patrol planes and managed to drive away 12 Chinese vessels. The West Sea fishing dispute is far from a simple argument over fishing rights. It's an international issue involving complex factors such as geopolitics, military strategy, economic interests, and environmental concerns, from illegal fishing to gray zone strategies, from the delineation of exclusive economic zones to military deployments at sea. The competition between China and South Korea in the West Sea is intensifying. The evolving situation in this region is worth paying close attention to, as it could not only affect China-South Korea relations, but also have far-reaching implications for the geopolitical landscape of Northeast Asia as a whole.